20 things from the 1970s that could make you rich today. That forgotten toy or gadget from the 1970s. It might be worth a fortune today. From Happy Meal toys to vintage typewriters, everyday items are now hot collectibles. Check your attic. You could be sitting on unexpected cash. Talking Busy Barbie. Barbie has been a childhood staple since her debut in 1959, captivating young collectors for generations. By the 1970s, Barbie had evolved beyond just being a simple fashion doll. Some editions had unique features that made them stand out. One of the most sought-after dolls from that era is the Talking Busy Barbie, along with her counterparts, Talking Busy Ken and Talking Busy Steffi. What made this Barbie special? Unlike previous versions, she was designed with fully functional hands that could grip and hold small toy accessories, making playtime more interactive. Her tiny fingers could clutch a miniature television, record player, or telephone, bringing an exciting, realistic element to Barbie's world. Plus, she had a built-in voice box that allowed her to speak, a high-tech feature for dolls at the time. If you happen to own one of these dolls and kept it in mint condition, you're in luck. A Talking Busy Barbie, still sealed in its original packaging, can fetch anywhere from $250 to $580 at auctions and collectors markets. Even if the doll isn't boxed, the accessories alone can still hold significant value. That's quite the return on a $5 investment from the 70s. Typewriters. Before laptops and tablets became the norm, typewriters were the go-to tool for writing everything from novels to office documents. These machines, once essential for communication and record-keeping, have long been replaced by computers. But that doesn't mean they've lost their value. In fact, for collectors and nostalgia lovers, vintage typewriters have become a hot commodity, with some models commanding impressive prices. While the most valuable typewriters tend to be mechanical models from the 1940s and earlier, even later versions have their appeal. The electronic typewriters that surged in popularity during the late 1970s and early 1980s are still sought after, particularly if they're in good working condition. Some well-known brands like IBM, Smith Corona, and Brother produced high-quality electric models that remain collectible today. Writers, artists, and retro tech enthusiasts prize them not only as functional tools, but also as stylish conversation pieces. If you happen to have an old typewriter stored away in the attic, it might be worth checking its condition. Depending on the model and demand, vintage typewriters can sell for anywhere from $50 to $1,200. Not bad for a piece of outdated technology that still has charm and character. Nancy Drew, Lunchbox, and Thermos. Nancy Drew has been captivating young readers since the 1930s, inspiring generations with her sharp detective skills and adventurous spirit. The books, especially first editions, still hold considerable value among collectors. But even if you no longer have your old Nancy Drew book collection, you might own something just as valuable: a vintage Nancy Drew lunchbox and thermos from the late 1970s. Back in the 70s and 80s, metal lunchboxes were a schoolyard staple, and kids loved bringing their favorite characters to the lunch table. This Nancy Drew lunchbox, featuring colorful artwork of the fearless teenage sleuth in action, became a must-have for fans. Complete with a matching plastic thermos, this lunch set was both stylish and functional. Today, these lunchboxes are considered collectible memorabilia, and their value depends on their condition. A well-preserved one, especially with vivid colors and minimal wear, can sell for anywhere from $30 to $280. If yours still has the thermos intact, you could be looking at the higher end of the price range. Sports Illustrated board games. Sports fans have always been eager to collect memorabilia, from jerseys to trading cards. But in the early 1970s, Sports Illustrated took fan engagement to another level by introducing its own baseball board game. The first edition debuted in 1971, allowing players to simulate the excitement of real baseball games right at home. Each year, new versions were released to reflect the most recent baseball season, making the game a dynamic and ever-evolving experience for fans. Unlike typical board games like Monopoly or Scrabble, these Sports Illustrated games appealed to serious baseball enthusiasts, offering detailed gameplay based on real-life stats and strategies. Players could manage teams, make play-by-play decisions, and experience the thrill of America's pastime in a whole new way. If you happen to have one of these vintage Sports Illustrated board games tucked away in a closet or attic, you might be sitting on a small jackpot. Depending on the condition, especially if the game is complete with all its pieces, it could fetch anywhere from $90 to $275. 1970 Lincoln Memorial Penny. Most pennies you come across today are worth exactly what you'd expect, 1 cent. But if you happen to stumble upon the right 1970 Lincoln Memorial Penny, you might be holding on to something worth hundreds of dollars. While it may look like an ordinary penny, certain versions from this year have rare errors or unique markings that make them highly valuable to collectors. One of the most well-known variations is the 1970s small date penny, which has a slightly different number style than the standard version. Even more valuable are the double-die obverse DDO pennies, which have a noticeable doubling effect on the lettering and numbers due to a minting error. These rare variations can turn a simple 1-cent coin into a collector's dream. If you've got a jar of old coins lying around, it's worth taking a closer look. Even a minor variation can make a huge difference in price, ranging anywhere from $1 to $800, depending on its rarity and condition. To determine if you have a valuable penny, check online coin price guides or visit a professional coin collector. That tiny coin in your pocket might be worth far more than just a cent. What's the most surprising item from the 1970s that you still own? Did you ever think it could be worth money? Superman's Ex-Pal comic book. If you were a Superman fan back in the 1970s, you might have a valuable comic book tucked away in an old toy box or storage bin. While ultra-rare comics from the era, like first appearances of major characters, can sell for millions, there are plenty of more common yet still valuable finds from the decade. One of these is the Superman's Ex-Pal comic book, a title that may not be as legendary as Superman's origin stories but still has a nostalgic charm and collector's appeal. Comics from this time were widely available, meaning many people had them in their collections. However, finding one in pristine condition today is much rarer. If you have a well-preserved copy, especially one that hasn't been folded, torn, or marked up, it could be worth much more than you'd expect. Values for this comic vary greatly based on condition. A well-loved, worn copy might only bring in $3 to $10, but if you have one in near mint or graded condition, it could fetch as much as $8,600 at auction. On average, though, most copies sell for around $200. Vintage Pyrex. If you've got old dishes and bakeware tucked away in storage, it's time to dust them off, especially if they're Pyrex. This iconic glassware brand, known for its bright colors, durable designs, and retro patterns, has become highly sought after by collectors. Whether it's a casserole dish, mixing bowl, or coffee mug, vintage Pyrex pieces from the 1970s are hot items in the world of antique and thrift shopping. What makes Pyrex so special? Aside from its timeless, eye-catching designs, these dishes were built to last, capable of withstanding extreme temperatures and heavy use. Certain patterns, like the butterprint, gooseberry, or friendship designs, are particularly valuable. Even the more common designs can fetch a decent price, especially if they're in great condition without chips or fading. On average, Pyrex pieces from the 1970s sell for around $100, but some rarer sets or limited edition patterns can command even higher prices. Collectors love finding complete sets with matching lids, which increases their value significantly. 1970 Hot Wheels mechanical watch. Long before smartwatches and digital timepieces, kids in the 1970s were rocking mechanical watches featuring their favorite brands and characters. One of the most sought after from that era? The Hot Wheels mechanical watch, a stylish and fun timepiece that was a must-have for young fans of the iconic toy car brand. Hot Wheels had already established itself as a leader in toy cars and racing tracks, and this watch was the perfect accessory for devoted fans. Designed with a bold, colorful faceplate featuring the Hot Wheels logo, it captured the high-speed excitement of the brand. Unlike today's digital watches, this timepiece required manual winding, adding to its vintage charm. If you happen to own one of these watches and kept it in working condition, it could be worth far more than its original price. Depending on the model and overall shape, these collectibles now sell for $35 to $265, with mint-condition pieces fetching the highest prices. If you've got one tucked away in an old jewelry box or dresser drawer, it might be time to take a second look. This nostalgic wristwatch could be a hidden treasure. Steve Miller Band Vinyl Box Set. Vinyl records have never truly gone out of style, and in recent years, they've made an impressive comeback. Collectors and music enthusiasts, young and old, are always searching for iconic albums to add to their collections. While digital music and streaming may dominate today, there's something timeless about the sound and feel of a classic LP. One such sought-after vinyl set from the 1970s is the Steve Miller Band Vinyl Box Set. Known for hits like The Joker, Fly Like an Eagle, and Take the Money and Run, the Steve Miller Band was one of the defining sounds of the decade. Their albums remain beloved classics, and owning an original vinyl box set is a treat for collectors. Though values fluctuate depending on condition and rarity, a Steve Miller Band vinyl box set from the 1970s can sell for anywhere between $5 and $160. While that may not seem like a fortune, some records, especially those from legendary bands like the Beatles, can fetch over $1,000. Vintage Thor Pez Dispenser. If you grew up with Pez dispensers, you know they were more than just a way to hold candy. They were collectible treasures in their own right. First introduced in the 1930s by an Austrian company, Pez dispensers didn't truly explode in popularity until the 1950s and beyond, when they began featuring beloved characters from pop culture. Today, certain vintage dispensers can fetch big bucks from collectors, and one of the more valuable ones from the 1970s is the Thor Pez dispenser. As part of the Marvel Comics Pez line, the Thor dispenser became a must-have for comic book fans. With his signature winged helmet and stoic expression, this small plastic toy paid tribute to the legendary Norse god-turned-superhero. Unlike the mass-produced dispensers of today, vintage Pez items were often made in limited quantities, making them harder to find decades later, especially in good condition. If you happen to have an original 1970s Thor Pez dispenser, it could be worth anywhere from $135 to $180, depending on its condition. Still sealed or in pristine shape, it might fetch even more. Thank you for watching our video. Where are you from? Comment below and let's reminisce together. 1970 German Cuckoo Clock. Few things are as instantly recognizable as a traditional German cuckoo clock. These beautifully crafted timepieces have been a symbol of German craftsmanship since the 1850s, particularly in the Black Forest region of southwestern Germany. Known for their hand-carved wooden details, intricate designs, and the signature cuckoo call on the hour, these clocks remain highly collectible and sought after by antique enthusiasts. If your family members or grandparents ever traveled to Germany in the 1970s, there's a good chance they brought home a cuckoo clock as a souvenir. While modern versions still exist, It's the older, handcrafted models that tend to hold or even increase in value over time. Many of these clocks were made with high-quality wood, delicate figurines, and detailed mechanical movements, making them both a functional timepiece and a work of art. If you come across a 1970s-era German Cuckoo clock, it could be worth around $300 or more, depending on condition, craftsmanship, and rarity. If it's still in working order and has its original pendulum and weights, its value could be even higher. Star Wars Early Bird Certificate Package. There's no denying that Star Wars is one of the most iconic and profitable franchises of all time. But before the movies became a cultural phenomenon, no one could have predicted the massive demand for Star Wars toys, not even the toy manufacturers. When Star Wars: A New Hope hit theaters in 1977, Kenner, the company responsible for producing the action figures, was caught off guard. They couldn't produce toys fast enough for the holiday season, leading to the creation of the legendary Star Wars Early Bird Certificate Package. This unique box set was essentially a promise to kids. Instead of actual action figures, the package contained a stand-up display, a sticker sheet, and a certificate that could be redeemed for 4 figures: Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and R2-D2. It was an unconventional solution, but it only added to the rarity and value of these collectibles today. If you happen to have one of these original early bird packages, especially in mint condition, it could be worth around $700. Individual figures from this era, like a 1978 Luke Skywalker, have sold for as much as $2,700. Even if your old Star Wars toys aren't in perfect shape, they still hold value, making them worth digging out of storage. The Force, and a potential fortune, could be with you. Old magazines. That stack of old magazines collecting dust in your attic might be worth more than you think. While many people toss out or forget about their old Vogue, Life, Reader's Digest, or Time issues, collectors are constantly searching for rare and historic editions. What once cost $1 or less in the 1970s can now fetch anywhere from $2 to $400, depending on its rarity, subject, and condition. So, what makes a magazine valuable? Covers featuring celebrities, major historical events, or limited special editions tend to bring in the highest prices. For example, a magazine featuring the moon landing, a presidential election, or the rise of a major pop culture icon could be worth a significant amount. Even fashion magazines like Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, with iconic models and designers from the era, have become highly collectible. If you've got a pristine copy, especially one with no torn pages or fading, it could be a hot item for collectors. Before tossing out those old magazines, take a closer look. You might just be holding on to a valuable snapshot of history that's worth far more than its original price. Antique chests and trunks. There's something undeniably exciting about finding an old trunk or chest, whether it's tucked away in a family attic or stumbled upon in a flea market or antique shop. Shows like Storage Wars have only added to the thrill of discovery, making people wonder what treasures could be hidden inside. But even if a trunk is completely empty, it could still be worth a significant amount just on its own. Antique chests and trunks from the 1970s or earlier were often handcrafted with sturdy wood, leather, or metal details, making them durable and stylish. Some were simple steamer trunks used for travel, while others featured ornate carvings, brass hardware, or intricate designs, making them desirable collector's pieces. If you happen to own an antique trunk, it might be worth anywhere from $100 to $700, depending on its age, craftsmanship, and condition. Restored or well-preserved pieces can fetch even higher prices. While some collectors hold on to them as functional storage or decor, others are willing to pay top dollar for rare or unique designs. Old Fisher-Price toys. For generations, Fisher-Price has been a staple in childhood playrooms, creating some of the most beloved and recognizable toys. Since its founding in the 1930s, the company has produced around 5,000 different toys, many of which are now considered nostalgic collectibles. While Fisher-Price is still producing toys today, it's the vintage pieces from the 1970s that hold special value for collectors. One of the most iconic and sought-after sets from this era is the Fisher-Price family camper set. This colorful plastic RV-style camper included Little People figures, furniture, and a pop-up camper roof, making it one of the must-have toys for kids growing up in the 70s. The original Little People toy line, which featured simple peg-like characters, has become particularly collectible as later versions evolved into different designs. If you've got old Fisher-Price toys from the 1970s, they could be worth anywhere from $25 to $150, depending on their condition and completeness. Toys in their original packaging, or with all pieces intact, can fetch the highest prices. Before donating or tossing out those childhood treasures, check their value. You might have a hidden gem from your past worth more than just sentimental memories. Which of these vintage treasures brought back the most memories for you? Let us know your favorite. Fashion jewelry. Ever wandered through a flea market or rummaged through an old jewelry box and wondered if those vintage pieces were worth more than just sentimental value? You're not alone. Many people overlook the potential hidden treasures sitting in their own homes, assuming costume or fashion jewelry has little worth. But with the right piece, you could be sitting on a valuable find. The first thing to check? Gold content. Even broken or outdated jewelry can fetch a high price when sold for its gold weight at a jeweler or gold dealer. But don't stop there. Just because a piece isn't solid gold doesn't mean it isn't valuable. Vintage fashion jewelry, especially those with unique designs, intricate settings, or high-quality craftsmanship, can be highly desirable to collectors. Some older pieces might even contain real gemstones, sterling silver, or rare materials that boost their worth. If you're unsure about what you have, it's worth consulting a jewelry appraiser or checking online resale platforms. Depending on rarity and condition, vintage fashion jewelry can sell for anywhere from $5 to $500. So before dismissing that old brooch or statement necklace, take a second look. It could be worth much more than you think. Model trains. For over a century, Lionel Trains has been a household name in the world of model railroads, captivating collectors and hobbyists alike. Since its founding in 1900, the company has produced some of the most detailed and beloved model trains, making them a valuable collectible today. While Lionel Trains have always been popular, their holiday-themed sets and specialty designs have made them a staple in many homes, especially around Christmas time. One of the most notable collecting eras for Lionel Trains is the MPC era, 1969 to 1995, when the company was owned by General Mills. During this time, Lionel released several unique and colorful designs, including the highly sought-after 1977 Mickey Mouse Express Railroad set. This whimsical, Disney-themed train is particularly desirable among both model train enthusiasts and Disney collectors, making it a valuable find. If you own vintage model trains, their worth depends on several factors, including rarity, condition, and whether the set is complete. Some can be found for as little as $5, while rare and well-preserved sets, especially in original packaging, can sell for up to $1,200. The original Sony Walkman. Long before smartphones and streaming, music lovers carried their favorite tunes in their pockets with the Sony Walkman. Introduced in 1979, the Sony TPSL-2 Walkman was a game-changer, giving people the freedom to listen to mixtapes and cassettes wherever they went. It was the birth of portable music, setting the stage for everything from CD players to MP3s to today's streaming apps. If you happen to keep an original 1979 Sony Walkman, you're in luck. Collectors are paying top dollar for this piece of tech history. While later Walkman models don't command much value, the first edition TPS-L2, with its blue and silver design, dual headphone jacks, and mechanical buttons, has become a highly desirable collector's item. Refurbished models in working condition have been selling on eBay and collector sites for as much as $800, sometimes even more. If you still have the original packaging, instructions, and accessories, the value can skyrocket. Happy Meal toys. Since their introduction in 1979, McDonald's Happy Meal toys have become an iconic part of childhood, with millions of kids eagerly anticipating the surprise inside their meal. Over the years, these toys have featured popular movie characters, TV show mascots, and even exclusive limited edition releases. While most people simply enjoyed them in the moment, some collectors held on to their toys, and today, that decision could be paying off. Though many modern Happy Meal toys still hold some resale value, it's the vintage ones, especially those from the 80s and 90s, that collectors are actively hunting for. Early toys based on Disney characters, McDonald's mascots like Ronald McDonald and Grimace, and promotional tie-ins with blockbuster films tend to fetch higher prices. Some of the most coveted sets include the McNugget Buddies, Fraggle Rock toys, and Changeables, transforming food items, from the late 80s. Depending on rarity and condition, vintage Happy Meal toys can sell for anywhere from $30 to $70, with complete sets and unopened toys bringing in even more. Atari 2600 console. Back in 1977, the Atari 2600 changed everything. It took video games from the arcade and brought them right into people's homes, creating a gaming revolution. Before that, if you wanted to play something like Pac-Man or Space Invaders, you had to dig for quarters and head to the nearest arcade. But with the Atari 2600, millions of people could suddenly play their favorite games without ever leaving their living rooms. This wasn't just a console, it was the birth of home gaming. The system became a household favorite, introducing legendary titles like Pitfall, Missile Command, and Adventure. Even though gaming technology has advanced far beyond the blocky graphics of the 2600, collectors still love this classic piece of history. If you've got one sitting in storage, especially with its original box, controllers, and game cartridges, you could be sitting on a small fortune. Depending on its condition, an Atari 2600 can fetch anywhere from $100 to $1,000. But the real jackpot? Rare games. A copy of Air Raid has sold for tens of thousands of dollars. So, before you toss that old console aside, take another look. It could be worth far more than you think. Boy Scouts Memorabilia. Since its founding in 1910, the Boy Scouts of America has been one of the largest and most influential youth organizations in the country. Millions of young scouts have earned their badges, uniforms, and gear. But what many don't realize is that these once simple items can now hold serious value for collectors. If you or a family member were a Boy Scout, you might have old uniforms, patches, belts, or bandanas stored away. While many patches were sewn onto uniforms, the most valuable ones remain unused. Rare patches, especially those from discontinued councils, special jamborees, or early Eagle Scout programs, can fetch a high price. Some highly sought-after patches have sold for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. But patches aren't the only thing worth checking. Boy Scout advertising materials, such as vintage posters, recruitment signs, or promotional gear, can bring in up to $5,000 if they're rare and well-preserved. Even old handbooks, merit badge guides, and camping gear can have resale value. With prices ranging from $5 to $5,000, it's worth taking a closer look at your old scouting gear. What was once a symbol of adventure and learning might now be a collector's treasure. 1980s, time-consuming activities we no longer do. Think life was simpler in the 80s? Think again. From cranking car windows in a downpour to spending hours crafting the perfect mixtape, everyday tasks took time and effort, and we didn't even question it. Join us as we rewind to the quirks, struggles, and forgotten rituals of the pre-digital era. You won't believe what we once considered normal. TV antennas. Before cable TV and long before the era of streaming, watching television required one essential piece of hardware, the TV antenna. Whether it was a set of bunny ears perched on top of the TV or a large antenna mounted on the roof, getting a clear picture was never a guarantee. Signal strength could be unpredictable, and if the reception wasn't strong enough, it became an entire trial and error process to adjust it just right. For many households, fixing a fuzzy screen meant physically moving the antenna, sometimes just slightly, sometimes in random directions, left, right, up, down, until the picture improved. And if that didn't work? Out came the aluminum foil, carefully wrapped around the ends of the antenna in hopes of boosting the signal. Desperate times called for desperate measures. If you were lucky enough to have a rooftop antenna, the reception was usually better, but adjusting it often required climbing up on the roof, a risky but necessary chore. Some fancier setups had motorized antennas that could be rotated with the turn of a dial, but not everyone had that luxury. Then, cable television started spreading across the country, and suddenly, all the hassle was gone. No more fiddling with antennas, no more static-filled screens. Of course, there was a catch. Cable came with an extra monthly bill, something we hadn't had to worry about before. But for most people, the convenience of a crystal-clear picture was well worth the cost. Dot matrix printers. If you were around in the 80s or 90s, chances are you encountered a dot matrix printer, whether at home, school, or work. Even if you never used one personally, you probably handled plenty of receipts, invoices, or forms printed on that distinctive paper with perforated edges. Video rental stores, offices, and even some cash registers relied on these machines, churning out documents with a sound that was unmistakable, a loud mechanical screeching that filled the room. One of the quirks of dot matrix printers was the special paper they used, which came in long, continuous sheets with holes along the sides. These holes were essential for feeding the paper through the printer. But once a document was printed, you had one final step: tearing off the perforated edges. It was a necessary but oddly satisfying task, even if it felt like a waste of time. And if you were like many of us, you didn't just throw those strips away. You turned them into something, folding them into tiny accordions, rolling them into inchworms, or just playing with them absent-mindedly. It was a universal experience. Surely I can't be the only one who did that. Commodore 64. If you were gaming on a computer in the 1980s, you quickly learned that patience was part of the experience. Unlike today, where you can just tap an app and jump into a game instantly, getting a game to run on a Commodore 64 was practically a ritual. First, you had to power it up and stare at the command prompt screen, ready to input a precise sequence of commands. Load, 8, 1. Hit enter, wait, and hope. If the ready prompt finally appeared, you'd then type run and hit enter again. And then, you waited some more. There were no flashy loading screens, just anticipation. Sometimes the game booted up without an issue. Other times you mistyped a single character and, whoops, time to start over. Compared to modern gaming, where everything's instant, this was a test of endurance. Kids today would probably lose their minds if they had to go through this process just to play a game. But back then, we didn't complain. It was just part of the magic. When the game finally loaded, all that waiting felt worth it. Rotary phones. For many of us who grew up before the digital age, the landline was a household essential. Long before cell phones made life more convenient, We had to actually dial numbers, and that meant we memorized the important ones. Family, friends, the local pizza place. We knew them all by heart. For those numbers we didn't call as often, we had a little handwritten contact book tucked away near the phone. And then there was the phone book, a massive yellow-paged directory that held the key to contacting just about anyone in town. Whether you were looking for a business or a neighbor, you had to flip through pages, scanning names until you found the right one. No quick Google searches back then, but even after finding the number, your work wasn't done yet. Dialing was a process, especially if you had a rotary phone. Each number had to be carefully turned, one at a time, and if you accidentally dialed the wrong digit, well, you had to hang up and start all over again. And let's not even talk about trying to win a radio contest. If you had a rotary dial phone, you had no chance against people with touch-tone keypads. Still, these old phones were sturdy, reliable, and built to last. If it still worked, why replace it? Sure, it was slower, but for many, it was just part of life. Tag a friend who would totally remember these 80s time wasters. Cassette tapes. The 1980s were a golden era for music, but it was also a time of transition. By 1983, 8-track tapes had faded into history, making way for a new technology, compact discs. However, CDs and their players came with a hefty price tag, so they weren't exactly flying off the shelves just yet. Vinyl records were still widely owned, but if there was one format that truly captured the hearts of music lovers, it was the cassette tape. These little plastic rectangles were a game changer. Compact, easy to store, and portable enough to take anywhere. Cassettes ruled our lives. Whether you were blasting music from a boombox, listening in the car, or slipping a tape into your Walkman for a personal concert on the go, cassettes were everywhere. But let's not forget the struggle. Finding your favorite song wasn't as simple as tapping a screen. It was a guessing game. Was it on side A or side B? If you had favorites on both sides, you were in for a lot of fast-forwarding, rewinding, and frustration. And every now and then, disaster struck. The dreaded tape unraveling inside the player. Thankfully, every music lover knew the universal fix. Grab a pencil, insert it into the spool, and twist it back into place. Kids today have no idea how easy they have it with instant track skipping. Road maps. Before the days of GPS and smartphone navigation, getting to your destination required a little more effort. There were no soothing voice prompts telling you when to turn or rerouting you if you made a mistake. Instead, you had two main choices: explore and figure it out as you went, or rely on a physical road map. If you opted for the map, it wasn't something you could easily handle alone, especially if you were driving. By the time you unfolded it, it was likely blocking half the dashboard, making it nearly impossible to check your speed or see the road clearly. Plus, tracking your route in real time was tricky, so you often had to memorize key roads and landmarks ahead of time. Some people even jotted down directions on a scrap of paper to reference while driving. And then there was the final struggle, folding the map back up. If you didn't get it just right, you ended up with a crumpled mess that never quite fit back the way it came. It felt like a puzzle with no clear solution. These days, GPS has made travel effortless. But back then, navigating the roads was an adventure in itself. Dead car batteries. These days, modern cars have built-in alerts, automatic shutoffs, and all sorts of safeguards to prevent a dead battery from ruining your day. But back in the day, if you forgot to turn off your headlights, you were in for a rude awakening the next morning. There was nothing worse than rushing out to your car, turning the key, and hearing that dreaded clicking sound. Your battery was completely drained. It was an easy mistake to make, especially since older cars didn't warn you when you left your lights on. Maybe you got home late and were too tired to notice, or maybe you spent hours parked up at Makeout Point, music playing, headlights glowing, unaware that you were slowly killing your car's power supply. And when the battery was dead, you had a few options. Find someone with jumper cables, call for a tow, or if you were really unlucky, start pushing. Today, you can keep the stereo running all night without worry, thanks to modern technology. But back then, a dead battery was a hard lesson in paying attention, one that almost everyone learned at least once. What's something from the 80s you still refuse to give up, even with modern alternatives? Live TV. It's almost hard to imagine now, but there was a time when watching television was a communal experience. Everyone tuned in at the same time, watching the same show as it aired. This was long before the convenience of DVRs, streaming services, or even the widespread use of VCRs. If you wanted to catch your favorite show, you had to be in front of the TV when it started, or you missed it. No pausing, no rewinding, no second chances. And of course, there were the commercials. Unlike today, where ads can be skipped with a single click, back then, you had no choice but to sit through them. Some were so catchy they became part of pop culture, with jingles you could hum for years. But let's be honest, the best thing about commercial breaks wasn't the advertising. It was the mad dash to the bathroom. As soon as the ads started, you bolted from the couch, hoping to make it back before your show returned. If you lived in a house with just one bathroom, things could get competitive. You did not want to be stuck waiting when the show came back on. Boomboxes. These days, charging devices is effortless. Just plug them in for a bit, and they're good to go for hours. But back in the day, if you wanted to take your music on the go, you weren't dealing with rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. You needed a stockpile of D batteries to keep your boombox running. Boomboxes were the ultimate portable music machines of the 80s and early 90s, blasting tunes from cassette tapes and radio stations. But they had one major downside. Powering them was a hassle. Depending on the model, they could require 6, 8, or even 10 massive D batteries, which weren't cheap, and they didn't last long, especially if you were constantly rewinding and fast-forwarding cassettes. And if you accidentally bought the wrong size batteries, like C instead of D, you were out of luck unless you could run to the store before it closed. People spent a small fortune on batteries, and carrying extra ones was just part of the deal. Boomboxes weren't light to begin with, and adding a pack of heavy-duty batteries only made them more cumbersome. But for music lovers, it was worth the effort. Compared to today's sleek, rechargeable Bluetooth speakers, those battery-hungry boomboxes were a true test of dedication. What's one thing you used to do in the 80s that today's kids would never understand? VCRs. VCRs first hit the market in the 1970s, but it wasn't until the mid-80s that they became a must-have household item. Suddenly, watching movies wasn't limited to theaters or whatever happened to be airing on TV. You could rent a film and enjoy it anytime you wanted, right from your living room. The movie industry wasn't too happy about it, fearing that home video rentals would cut into their profits. But for consumers, it was a game changer. Of course, the experience wasn't as effortless as today's streaming services. Watching a movie at home meant making a trip to the local video rental store, an event in itself. You'd spend time wandering the aisles, picking up VHS cases, reading the back covers, and debating with family or friends about what to watch. It wasn't just about renting a movie, it was a Friday or Saturday night tradition. And once you finally settled on a title, the responsibility wasn't over. After watching, you had to rewind the tape before returning it, hence those famous stickers. Be kind, rewind. Some stores even charged a rewind fee if you skipped this step. And let's not forget the dreaded late fees. Miss the return deadline, and you'd owe a few extra bucks. Waiting by the phone. Before texting, DMS, or read receipts, Waiting for someone to call was a full-time commitment. If you had a date, a crush, or even just a friend who promised to call, you had to plant yourself next to the phone and wait, and wait, and wait. There was no way to carry the phone with you. It was stuck in one place, usually in the kitchen or living room. If you left the room for even a minute, you risked missing the call, which meant starting the waiting game all over again. And let's not forget the torture of a busy signal. If they were on the phone when you called, you had zero idea when they'd be done. No call waiting, no voicemail, no way to leave a message unless they had an answering machine, which, let's be real, not everyone did. Preteens in the 80s alone racked up millions of hours doing this exact thing, anxiously staring at the phone, picking it up to check if it was still working, or worse, yelling at a sibling to get off the line so you wouldn't miss the call. Compared to today, when a quick "you up?" text can be sent in seconds, the 80s were a different world, one where patience wasn't just a virtue, it was mandatory. Before smartphones, it's almost unbelievable to think about how many separate gadgets and tools we used to carry around before smartphones consolidated everything into one device. Today, one sleek phone handles everything. But back in the day, you needed an entire bag just to get through the day. If you wanted to make a call, you needed a phone, and not a tiny one either. If you needed to know the time, you wore a watch. Directions? A paper map. Need to jot something down? A notebook and pen? Music? That meant lugging around a Walkman and a few cassette tapes. Your address book kept all your contacts. Your calculator handled math. And if you were managing finances, you carried a checkbook. Want to read the news? That required a newspaper. And if you were capturing memories, that meant carrying an actual video camera, which wasn't exactly pocket-sized. And let's be real, some of us even carried calculators just in case. Because when you had to split a bill or figure out gas mileage, doing long division in your head wasn't always ideal. Today, it's all in your smartphone, a single device that replaces an entire briefcase of 80s essentials. It's wild to think about, but back then, this was just normal life. Answering machines. Back in the 1980s, if you weren't home to pick up the phone, you had one hope: your answering machine. These little devices, which relied on cassette tapes, became a staple in many households. But they weren't just for taking messages. They were also an art form. Everyone had to perfect their greeting. Some people kept it short and professional, while others had a bit of fun with it, throwing in a joke or a cheesy line. If you were going on vacation, you might even leave a message letting callers know when you'd be back. This was especially important for people whose jobs depended on being reachable. As useful as answering machines were, they could also be frustrating. Most were set to pick up after 5 rings, meaning you had to sit through an entire greeting before finally leaving a message, if the machine had space. Nothing was more annoying than waiting through the whole thing only to hear, "Tape full. Cannot record message." And listening to messages? That was a process too. You couldn't just skip ahead like voicemail today. You had to either listen to everything or fast forward and guess where the next message started. Once you were done, you had to rewind the tape to erase the old ones and make space for new recordings. It was time-consuming and a bit of a hassle, which is probably why some people never bothered getting one. Wristwatches. These days, most of us just glance at our phones to check the time. Wristwatches still exist, but let's be honest, they've become more of a fashion statement than a necessity. But there was a time when having a watch on your wrist was absolutely essential. If you were old enough to remember, you might have even owned a wind-up watch, one that didn't rely on batteries, but instead needed to be manually wound each day to keep running. Owning a watch back then wasn't just about wearing it, you had to maintain it. If your watch had a date display, it wouldn't always adjust itself at the end of months with fewer than 31 days, so you had to reset it manually. And when daylight saving time rolled around, that was another adjustment to make. But how did we even know if our watch was showing the exact time? Well, we didn't have the internet or automatic syncing. Instead, we called the local time and temperature phone line, listening to a recorded voice tell us the current time down to the second. It wasn't just our wristwatches. We did the same thing for wall clocks, alarm clocks, and any other timepieces in the house. Compared to today's automatically updating digital world, keeping track of time back then was a little more involved. But in a way, it made us more aware of time itself, something that's easy to take for granted now. Physical media. Looking back, it's incredible how much physical media has changed over the years. At one time, if you wanted to watch a movie at home, you had to own or rent a beta cassette. That is, until VHS took over as the dominant format. Then came the laser disc, a short-lived, oversized alternative that never quite caught on with the mainstream. Many people skipped that phase entirely and waited for the next big thing, DVDs. But collecting movies wasn't just about watching them. It was an investment. We spent a small fortune on physical copies, along with the storage racks and cabinets to keep them organized. And let's be honest, how many times did we buy the same movie in multiple formats? A beloved film that once sat on our VHS shelf eventually had to be upgraded to DVD, and later, some even bought the Blu-ray version. It felt like a never-ending cycle. Now, with streaming services offering instant access to thousands of films, physical media is fading into the past. But for those of us who lived through the golden age of home video, it's hard to part with those old VHS tapes. Meanwhile, DVDs, with their easily scratched surfaces, were the first to go. Manual car windows. These days, when it starts raining, you just tap a button and your car window glides up effortlessly. But back in the day, power windows weren't standard, and rolling up your window meant a full-on arm workout, especially if you were trying to beat a sudden downpour. If you were cruising along on a nice day with the windows down and the sky suddenly turned dark, panic mode kicked in. You'd have to crank that window as fast as humanly possible, hoping to get it closed before your car seats and yourself got soaked. If you had passengers, they had to roll up their own windows, and heaven help you if you were stuck at a red light when the rain hit. No automatic, one-tap close here. You had to earn it. And while we're talking about old-school car quirks, let's not forget the way back. That glorious seatbelt optional space in the rear of station wagons and vans. Before safety laws tightened up, kids just piled in, sometimes sitting backwards, sometimes sprawled out, no restraints in sight. Looking back, it's a miracle more of us survived the 80s unscathed. Now seatbelts and power windows are standard, and while it's definitely safer, kids today will never know the thrill or terror of rolling up a window at lightning speed in a sudden storm. Floppy disks. If you used a 5¼ inch floppy disk for storage back in the day, you quickly realized one thing: you needed a lot of them. These thin, flexible disks were essential for running programs and saving data, but their capacity was laughably small by today's standards. A standard floppy could hold just 360 kilobytes, barely enough for a single image file by today's measure. If you were lucky enough to have the higher density versions, you got 1.2 megabytes, which still wasn't much. Because of these limitations, saving data was a tedious process. Some programs required multiple disks just to run, and if you were storing personal files, you often had to spread them across several floppies. Organization was key. People carefully labeled their disks to keep track of what was on each one. And let's not forget the delicate nature of these things. A single scratch, a bent disk, or even exposure to a magnet could wipe out everything in an instant. Compared to today's effortless cloud storage and terabyte-sized hard drives, saving files back then was a true test of patience. We didn't know how good we had it now, but looking back, it's amazing that we managed at all. What's one time-consuming task from the 80s that you remember struggling with the most? Flipping through channels. Today, finding a channel is effortless. You just pull up the on-screen guide, type in the name, and boom, you're there. But back in the early days of cable, finding MTV, or any channel really, could be a frustrating guessing game. There was no digital guide, no search function, just a box with numbered buttons that you had to click through one by one. And when something big was about to premiere, like Michael Jackson's Thriller music video, the pressure was on. You couldn't afford to waste time. If you forgot which channel MTV was on, you had to start clicking through as fast as possible, hoping you landed on it before the show started. And since channels weren't always in a logical order, you might end up flipping past MTV, then frantically going back, praying you hadn't already missed the best part. Compared to today, when you can rewind, pause, or just stream later, the 80s were high-stakes TV viewing. If you weren't on time, you missed it. No replays, no second chances. That's why finding the right channel quickly felt like a life-or-death mission. Mixtapes. If you've embraced modern technology, you probably have a personalized playlist filled with your favorite songs. Just a few taps, and it's done. But when I hear someone casually call it a mixtape, I can't help but smile. Because, back in the cassette era, making a mixtape wasn't just about picking songs. It was a time-consuming art form that required patience, skill, and a little bit of luck. Back then, the best way to build your collection was by recording songs off the radio. But it wasn't as simple as hitting a button. You had to sit by your boombox or stereo for hours, waiting for your favorite song to play. When it finally did, you had to hit record at just the right moment, praying that the DJ wouldn't start talking over the intro or outro. If they did, tough luck. You might not hear that song again for another 24 hours, if not longer. This process repeated over and over until you finally filled a tape with hand-picked songs, creating a personal soundtrack that you could carry anywhere. It wasn't instant, it wasn't easy, but that's what made it special. A well-made mixtape was a labor of love, and the effort that went into making one made it feel far more meaningful than today's instant playlists. Did we miss any valuable collectibles? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of the series for more nostalgic discoveries. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Who Remembers with a friend. Thanks for watching, and happy treasure hunting.